What is up, gangsters, savages, reprobates, and hooligans of all kinds? Just trying to be inclusive. But it is kind of funny how some people look at that greeting. Gangsters is just something I've been saying for years and years, long before I ever decided to make a YouTube video about model making. But it's kind of funny how some people seem to react to it. I think most people understand that, it's just kind of convivial and just normal banter. But I actually have had one or two delicate flowers apparently get upset with the fact that I sometimes call my friends in the Scale Modelers Critique group or here on my YouTube channel gangsters and savages and tell me that I was being condescending. It's nothing of the kind. So I hope nobody gets offended by it. It really is just a term of endearment. I just, get bored with the same old, like bros and dudes and guys and whatever. So anyway, I know you guys are like, shut the fuck up and make the video already. So that's what we're going to do. Today's video is a little bit different for two reasons. One is that it's going to go outside of the workbench, and I'm going to talk about something that we do after the workbench, which is take care of our photographs. And so what I'm going to do is give you guys a breakdown of Adobe Lightroom. And it's going to be, the second reason it's going to be a little different for me is because I'm actually going to narrate this from my desk in front of my Mac in the other room. And I've never done that before, but I hope it'll turn out good. I even went and bought one of those cool blue microphones, the round ones, so that the sound quality will be good enough. So anyway, why Adobe Lightroom? If you haven't ever heard of it, it is a product made by Adobe, the same guys that make Photoshop, and it is easily the #1 application used by professional photographers. I think, I don't have hard data in front of me, but I don't think it's unfair to say that 90% of pro photographers are using Lightroom. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a tool for pro photographers only. Lightroom gives you all of the same basic tools for processing photographs. In fact, it runs off of the same Adobe RAW engine that Photoshop runs off of. But without all of the extraneous complications that you get with Photoshop. Photoshop can be really dense and the learning curve can be steep. And honestly, for most photographs, you just don't need it. And Adobe built Lightroom to address that. So it's really good. It's really easy to learn and really easy to use, and yet very powerful. And if you are a model maker who builds for photography like I do, and you want to crank out good photos for display on Facebook or forums, or to send off with magazine article submissions or whatever, you really do need a basic set of photo editing tools. And Lightroom gives you all those, as well as a lot of very powerful photo organization capabilities. So, lots of people have asked me about it and how to use it, and so I thought now was finally a good time to make a video for it. So, let's get to it. Okay, so let's check out Lightroom. Now, before we really get into how to use it, let's just take a quick tour around inside of Lightroom so you can see what all the different parts of it are. So what you'll notice up here is that you've got all of these different modules listed. The library module is basically where you can look at all your images, take care of all your organizational stuff, doing things like keywording, and looking at metadata if you want to. And we'll come back to some of that stuff. The develop module is where you actually will spend time working on images. This is where you do things like making color corrections. If you wanted to turn an image into black and white, you could do that. You can see over here you've got all kinds of controls that allow you to modify the way that an image looks. The map feature is something that you would use with metadata. This is a relatively new feature with Lightroom, and it basically allows you to organize photos based on any location information that's included in the metadata attached to each image. The book module is pretty cool. This is something that you might use if you were going to take a bunch of your photos and create an actual printed book. And hopefully, I don't know why it's acting so slow right now. Hopefully it'll get us over to that module. Honestly, I've never even clicked on the book module in my latest installation of Lightroom because I just haven't had any need to use it. But it connects you with book printing services like Blurb, which are really cool. So if you wanted to ever create an actual printed book, which I've done before using Blurb, it's a pretty cool way to go. Slideshow is exactly what it sounds like. This basically allows you to take a set of images and produce a slideshow that you could play on screen or through a projector, or that you could export for use on a website, for example. And then, of course, the print module is pretty self-explanatory. This gives you all of the tools that you need to print your photographs. And it does a pretty good job of it. There's certain limitations that you would need to go beyond Lightroom to be able to deal with for serious photography printing, but that's where something like Photoshop comes in. And for most of you guys as model makers, you probably are honestly never even going to use the print module. The web module is there so that you can export things like galleries for a photo blog and different things like that. I'm not going to spend any time on that because, again, as model makers, it's not much use to us. Honestly, even if you are a professional photographer, you will spend most of your time inside of Lightroom between the library and the develop module. And as model makers, if you're using Lightroom, that is most definitely the case. That's where you're going to find all the tools that are useful. So, first off, let's spend some time in the library module and talk about some of the cool things that it will do. But the first thing we have to talk about is how you actually get your photographs into Lightroom. Lightroom, it's important to understand, is basically a library-driven application. And what that means is that it doesn't actually store any of the files themselves. What it does is it creates a list of pointers that directs the application to look at the actual image files wherever they're stored on your system. It's also what's called a non-destructive photograph editor, in that any changes that you make to the photograph, like for example that one that I turned black and white right here, the change that I made to that is not actually made to the actual photograph. It's basically a recipe that would be baked into the exported version of the photograph if I chose to go over here and hit export and save that image for anything else that I wanted to use it for. So, all that being said, the first question is, how do you actually tell Lightroom how to see the images that you want it to look at? There's different ways to do it. Lightroom has features that will allow it to automatically import all of the photographs on a card or directly from a camera or even wirelessly now, if you choose to do it that way. I do not choose to do it that way. I'm a little bit old school in that I like to have complete control of how my photographs are stored and handled so that I don't ever lose anything. So I'll show you how I do it. I'm sure people who are going to laugh about how simple it is and how old-fashioned, but the bottom line is it's bulletproof, and I never lose images. So what I do is, first thing is I plug a card into my USB port, and I go over here to the drive where and I use an external drive because duh, if you're storing photographs anywhere other than an external drive, you are risking their inevitable loss if your computer bites the dust. So at any rate, I have a large directory where I have all of my image catalogs. And I'll explain what I mean by catalogs here in a second. But the bottom line is, let's go to Images 2017. So you can see that I have all of these images, and if I wanted to, for example, go to this one where I reshot all the pictures of my Dragon BF109, then you can see that these are all of the raw files from my camera. So let's say, for example, that I want to import one of these files. Let's just go for this one right here. Why not? So now that I've told Lightroom which directory to look in, well, let me back up. I forgot to say that what I do is I manually, well, first I create the directory that I want the photographs to live in. So in this case, I went onto my external hard drive in my directory for this year. As you can see, I have one for each year. So I go into the directory that I want my images to live in, which is for this year. I would have created a directory called Dragon 109 Reshoot, and then I would manually drag and drop all of the images from the card that I took out of my camera into this directory. Once those images are inside of that directory, that's where they will live forever. I will never move them, because that's when you start causing problems and you start losing stuff. And remember, Lightroom is always looking operating as a pointer to where these images live. So although there are ways to move images around such that Lightroom can keep track of them, again, why do it when you're just opening up the possibility of creating problems? So again, once I've got all of the images inside of that directory, then what I would do is I would come over here to Import, and I just tell it, and I'll do this manually. It's saved the previous locations that I've been importing from, but let's just go back to that BF109 directory because that's an easy one. So let's go here, and there's Images 2017 and Dragon 109 Reshoot. Now you can see all these images are gray, and that's basically because at this point all I can do is select a location. So I say choose. Now what it's going to do is it's going to offer me the opportunity to import all of the images that are in this folder. But I don't want all of them right now because this is just a demo. So I'm going to uncheck all, and then I'm going to just pick, where was the one that I wanted? I'm just going to pick this one. And you can see that you've got the opportunity to import all photos or only new photos. I always keep it on new photos because that's easier. You also have some options up here. I'm not going to explain all of them, but let's just say that add is where I keep it all the time. I don't see any reason to ever do any of these others, given the way that I organize my files. So I'm going to add these files to a Lightroom directory. Okay, and you can see that it's got the image here now. It's imported it. And now over here I have a new directory called Dragon 109 Reshoot. Now that directory is only inside the mind of Lightroom. All it's doing here is creating a list of pointers to where each of these images is located. So hopefully that makes sense. The next thing I would do is I would start making changes to this photograph. Which, wow, I picked one with the figure all kinds of blurry, didn't I? Anyway, for the purposes of demonstrating how to import, that's fine. We'll talk about how to actually manipulate an image here in a little while. So let's go back over here to this directory. This is my miscellaneous reference photos catalog. And you can actually see up here at the top where it says reference images.lrcat. And this is where I want to explain what a catalog is. Lightroom operates off of catalogs. And what a catalog is it's basically everything that you see in front of you right here. It's the entire set of information that describes where the photographs in the catalog are located and what kind of changes you've made to them, or changes that you will make to the exports of the photographs from that directory in that catalog when you choose to do it. So the catalog concept is pretty important. Now, a lot of people will just create one giant catalog and they'll import every photograph on their hard drive into that one giant catalog. And there's generally nothing wrong with that, although, and it's not as much of a problem as it used to be back in the day, but you can end up with a lot of pictures in a catalog by doing that. You can see I've got almost 2,000 images in here, and the only directory that's contained in this catalog are my reference images. There's a specific reason why I chose to have a catalog just for reference images, but I have a bunch of other catalogs, and you can see if I went here to open recent, you can see all of my catalogs correspond to the names of those big folders for each year. And in general, that's the way I organize my catalogs. I have one catalog for each year, and every project that I photographed during that year is contained within a subfolder inside of that year's folder. I have a couple of other catalogs that I use for specific purposes, like my iPhone images catalog, and that's all that's inside there. That works for me. Yeah, it means that if I want to hop around and find images from a different year, that I have to close Lightroom and reopen it in a different catalog, but that's fine. I don't mind doing that. It helps me stay organized, but you know, each person should do it the way that makes the most sense to them. Anyhow, so here we are inside of the miscellaneous reference photos collection. And this is where I want to start talking about some of the organizational features of Lightroom, which are very powerful. And a lot of people, unfortunately, don't really take advantage of that because they just sort of skip right over it and go straight to the photo processing part, which is understandable, I guess. But by doing that, you're missing out on a large part of the convenience of using an application like Lightroom. So that'll be the next thing that I'll talk about. Okay, so here we go. Let's talk about using the library module, and specifically how I use it to organize my reference photos, because I know a lot of you guys out there have your own collections of reference photos as well. The first thing I want to talk about is metadata, because that's a concept that some of you non-photographers may not be familiar with. Metadata just means data about data. And every digital image gets some attached to it automatically, even whether that's a digital image taken by your phone on your camera. I mean, by the camera on your phone. If you have a digital SLR, whatever it is, every photograph gets some metadata automatically applied to it. And you can also add metadata, and that's what I'm going to show you here. Metadata includes things like the size of the file, the type of the file, when it was, when the image was taken, if it's copyrighted, what size it is. You can even see in a lot of cases what type of camera it was taken with, what the camera settings were. That's all part of what's known as EXIF data, and that's pretty useful stuff. That I'll show you how that gets used here in a little while. But sometimes you want to add metadata, like this particular image of this Spitfire. Somebody wanted to add a caption into the metadata. These two RCAF boys had a large job on their hands, blah, blah, blah. And that's pretty cool, especially for these historical images that people have taken the time to do that. And that stuff gets passed on as the images are saved and, uploaded back to the web and so forth. I don't know that I'm ever going to do that, but I have my own metadata that I want to add, and that's called keywords. Now, keywords are fantastic because they are basically words that are attached to an image that are descriptive, and they can be used for searches. And you can see right here in this keyword section that there are some keywords attached. 402 Squadron, Airman, Painting, Spitfire, WW2. Now, those last two keywords are Spitfire and WW2. I added myself. If you go over here to this picture of this Mustang, you can see all I've added so far is USAAF and WW2. If you go to this picture of this B25, you can see I've added the keyword B25. Now, this is super useful because let's say somebody on Scale Modelers Critique Group says, hey, does anybody have a good picture of a weathered B25 Mitchell? Well, I know I do, but I also know that I have 2,000 images, and that's probably small compared to some of your collections. And I don't want to have to manually search through all these to find my dirty B25 pictures. So what I'm going to do is while I'm in the library mode, and you have to be in the grid mode, go up here to text, click on that. This lets me set up a text filter. So any searchable field contains, and you get different options, but let's say contains the words, and I'm just going to put in B25. And boom, see what happened there? Now the only thing I'm looking at here out of my 2,000 images are my B25 pictures. Isn't that cool? And of course, I could have any number of keywords that would allow me to create even finer filters. I could, have keywords for B25B, B25J, B25H, North American factory, just all. I mean, you can keyword to your heart's content as much as you can imagine that you might want to use as search parameters. You can apply keywords for. There's no limit. And the way that I start building my keywords in my collection, and by the way, when I go back and forth between the single view and the grid view, I just hit the G key, and that puts me back in grid view. What I do when I want to start building my keywords is I work from the top down. So I went through all of these pictures, for example, and I just started adding World War II to all of those images. Then I did a filter on only World War II. And then I went through and I added RAF, USAAF, Luftwaffe to all of the appropriate images. And then I can filter down on that next subcategory. So now it's World War II RAF only. Then I go through and I start naming aircraft. So then I go through and I added the words Tempest, for example. And there we go. There's all my Tempest photos. So you can see how that can get pretty powerful pretty quickly. Now, how do I add keywords to so many images very quickly? All right, you can do it. Let me jump out to something where I don't have a lot of other keywords. So let's go to just my jets category, and let's say, okay, now I've got a bunch of F86 pictures and I want to add the keyword F86 to all of those. So see this gizmo right here? This is called the spray can. When you click on that, it gives you the ability to spray parameters onto images very quickly. And there's a bunch of different things that you can make the spray can do. And you can see right here that they're all about your labels and filters. So I'm going to put on here the keyword F86. Okay. Now, notice that my cursor looks like a spray can whenever it's on top of the image portion of a picture. So if I go here, I can just click assigned keyword F86 to that image. Go over here and do it again. Go over here and do it again. So you can see how even when you're doing it one click at a time, it can be very fast. But you can also do it to a bunch of images at once. Like I've got two right here together that are both F86 cockpit. All you do is click on one and hold the mouse button down and swipe across the other one, and now it's applied the keyword F86 to both of those images right there together. So that's a pretty powerful thing, and you can work through images very quickly by doing that. So let me go here and shut off the spray paint can. Oh, we got to click on the little circle. Okay, so now if I filter on jets and F86, there's the 5 images that I keyworded. Now here's another cool thing you can do that will save you from having to create or do a search every time. Let's say that I want to always have my F86 images handy. So see over here where it says collections. Okay, so I can hit the plus key. I can do create a collection, and I'm going to call this collection F86 pics. Pardon my slow typing. And it's going to create it. And I've only got one photo selected, but I could have already selected them. But that's okay. So now I've got this, see, it's created me this collection, and it had the one image in there. But now I want to add the rest of them. So I go back over to the main selection. I go and I filter on my F86 images, and it's preserved that filter set. So now I'm going to just do a click, shift click to collect these 4, and I'm going to just drag them. Whoops, I didn't do a good job of dragging. Okay, I'm going to just drag them over here to my F86 collection, and you can see that the number changed to 5. And now if I go into that F86 pics collection, bam, there are those 5 images. So again, you can see how you can do lots of things to keep yourself organized. Another really cool thing is, you see these things down here, you can give ratings of stars or colors to your images. So let's say for some reason I wanted to label these two BF110 images. I could give them both 5 stars. I could also give them a color if I wanted to. And the cool thing is that now I've got built-in filters down here. I can go and filter on only 5-star images, and you can see that those are added to that set of images. I already had 5 stars added to these F4 images, and they were also color-coded purple. So you can see how these filters down here, if I clicked on the purple tab right here, now it's only going to show me the 5-star images colored purple. So again, you can see how these features can be very powerful in helping you stay organized. Okay, now I think that's most of what you need to know about operating inside of the library. We're gonna now take a look at the develop module. But what I want to do is walk through the complete process for that. So let's go back and import a couple of more images for the from this same 109 folder. So let me just get, hopefully I can get one that's some that are a little bit better in focus. I'm going to uncheck all these. I'm going to just select, and I'm on a Mac, so I use Command Shift. Let's get that one, and let's get this one, and let's get this one and this one. And I'll just, now that I've selected them all, I'll just hit the select box to check them all, and I'll import those. So now I have added these 5 images into my little directory here. And you can see that it's only showing those 5 because that's the current import. But if I click on the tab for that directory, it shows them all. Now, I don't want this one anymore because it's blurry. So I'm going to just hit the delete key, and it's going to ask me, do I want to delete that from the disk or just remove it from Lightroom? If it was a junky photo that I didn't want to keep, I would delete it from the disk. But in this case, I only want to remove it from Lightroom. So when I do that, it takes it out of my little directory here, but it keeps it in its actual location on my hard drive. So now I've got these images imported into Lightroom, and you can see I sort of screwed up, and I imported some JPEGs that I had already previously processed. And you can see that up here where it says what type of file it is, and as opposed to just these raw files. So I'm going to get rid of these two. I don't want to mess with them, so I'm going to just Command highlight, go back to the grid, hit delete, and remove those. So now we've got these 3 raw files straight out of my camera, and I'm going to just show you some real basic edits that I can do so that you get an idea of what you might want to do. I mean, ideally, look, you shouldn't be doing a whole lot of editing to your model photographs. I don't ever want to hear about anybody modifying them to make them look better or whatever. And obviously, if you change the colors or whatever too much, then they're not going to look like they really were when you built them. So even though I can do all kinds of things in here, I can turn this image black and white, Control Z to back off of that. I can do all kinds of stuff, but most of it I don't need to. But let me just walk you through some things that are pretty common here. One of the most important things is having correct white balance, so that you make sure that your colors are correct. So let's say that this image came in like this, where it's like obviously really blue. Well, that's no good. That means the white balance was poorly set when I made the photograph. So what you can do here is click on this eyedropper tool, go over here and click in a neutral area that's just white or gray, and boom. See, it immediately makes that color correction. So now all of the rest of the colors are correct. Now, if I had an image that was not properly exposed, I can modify that. Here with the exposure tool, I can increase exposure, decrease exposure. And you can do it with the slider, or you can just click in the little dialog there and type in the value that you want. I don't mess with contrast too much. Highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. The highlights are obviously the brightest parts of your photograph. Opening up the shadows is one that I use sometimes. Let's say that I want to make this cockpit look a little bit brighter. Okay, so all I did there was click. If you notice, my cursor is a magnifying glass. That's automatic. And when I click on there, it's going to zoom in for me at whatever ratio is specified over here. And I've got it on 3:1 right now. Now, let's say that this cockpit was really dark, and I wanted to open up the shadows in there so you could see the instruments and things better. Then I can just I can increase the shadows slider, and that will help me with that. This photograph is pretty decently exposed, so no need to do too much of that. Blacks are important because they will harden up your colors, so you can lighten those or darken those, and you can see what I mean by harden the colors. That instantly looks like a more intense photograph. So sometimes I'll use the blacks slider a little bit. Clarity is another important one that you'll see a lot, and you can see what happened there when I slammed it all the way. You'll see us maybe talk about this sometimes on images that have been posted, where you just see every single rivet and stain, in dramatic relief. And somebody will say, oh yeah, he's got the clarity slider cranked on that image. Well, this is what they mean. What clarity does is basically it increases the contrast of the midtones to make a photograph look sharper and more vibrant. And it's a powerful tool, and when used with care, it definitely will improve your photograph. But again, use with care is the important thing there. Vibrance only improves the saturation of certain colors. I'm not going to get into all the details with that, but it's a useful one. But again, like anything, you can take it way too far. Saturation, I think everybody knows what that does, and you can see that it operates just a little bit differently than the vibrance setting does. So the basic tools that you need for modifying an image are all contained right here. And even though there's a bunch of other stuff down here, I'm not going to get into any of that because it's stuff that you really honestly should not need for straight up editorial photographs of your model. Now, I do want to point out pretty quickly, again without going into a huge amount of detail, that there are some useful features right here in this toolbar. One in particular is this spot removal thing. If you've got a dirty sensor in your camera and you've got spots on your image, or if you had some little specks of dirt on your white background that you needed to remove, that's what this spot remover thing is for. And this is all pretty clean, so it's kind of hard to show you how it works, but take a look right here. See where this little access panel is? So I enlarged the reticle to make it big enough to include that whole thing, and I click on it, and what it does is, see there, it lets me select another area of the image to substitute in for the part that was selected. So when I select done, boom, my little access panel disappeared as if it was never there. So if you've got specks of dust, or if you find that you've got a hair or a speck of dirt or something that you didn't notice while you were photographing, that's a good way to fix those things. If you need to remove that, you just go back into that mode and you can select it and hit delete, and it goes away. So that's a very useful tool. Now, this brush right here is also very useful. This lets you do localized adjustments. All of these things right here are things that can be applied with this brush now. And just to make it easy to see what it does, let me take this exposure slider and crank it way up. And now I've got a brush, and I make it bigger and smaller by using the bracket keys. And now look, wherever I paint, it's going to create that effect. Now if I go over here and add some of these other things, they're all going to happen within the area that I just brushed. So you can see how that can be pretty powerful, and it can be very useful. For example, if the whole photograph was pretty well exposed, but I wanted to only increase the ability to see inside the cockpit, I could also just create a brush, increase the exposure a little bit, and brush down inside that area. If you have a brush that you don't need anymore, that you don't like, you highlight it and you just click on it. Now you may have noticed that that just turned red. When you hover over that little dot, it shows you in red the area that's affected by the brush. So don't need that brush anymore. We'll delete that one. Okay, so that gives me the ability to do all kinds of little improvements to my photograph. Now, one thing that I like to do that's really powerful in Lightroom is have standard sets of modifications that I want to apply. Like, for example, I might like to, I have this black and white look, for example, that I've created a bunch of settings over here for, and I want to save those. That's what presets are for. And you can create all of these different presets that allow you to apply a complete set of settings with one click. You can also buy presets. Like I've got this set here called Power Workflow. I don't use much anymore, but you can go in and you can select one of those and it gives you a complete look. Again, not super useful for editorial photographs, but you might know, for example, that your camera always needs a little bit of increase on the blacks and you know, maybe a little bit of sharpness, a little bit of vibrance or whatever. So you might have a little preset like this one that all it does is increase clarity and vibrance. Actually, I've modified the preset where it increases the vibrance by 30, as I say over here, but I don't have that 45% clarity increase anymore. So let me just add a little bit to that. So let's say that I've decided that this is all I want to do to my images to make them ready to show you guys on you know, the SMCG page, or send to a magazine, or put them on one of my videos or whatever. So I've done all of my changes to this one image, but I have like 15 or 20. So this is another very powerful thing with Lightroom. What I can do now is go here. I've applied the changes that I want to one image, and now I want all of the rest of them to match. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Shift click to select all three of those. And then if you go over here, notice that I've got this thing here that says Sync. This now gives me an entire list of all of the modifications that are possible from this menu over here. And you can see that a bunch of them are already selected. I could check all of them, I could check none of them. I can just go in and check the specific ones, like the clarity and the vibrance and the white balance that I did to this photo. And then I go synchronize, and boom, now all three of these images have the exact same settings. And obviously when you're presenting a set of images, that's what you want. So this is pretty useful. Let's say though, there's one thing I forgot to show you guys that's also pretty useful. You need to know this selection right here is for cropping. You can also just hit the R key. Now this gives you the crop screen, and it lets you change the size of the image there in case you want to focus more on one thing. So that's again a really important thing that you might be inclined to do as a model maker working with your photos. But I have obviously only sort of skimmed the surface of all of this stuff. The last thing that you would do with these images, because hopefully you guys understand that what I've done here is I've told Lightroom that I would like to add all of these settings to these images when I export. None of the changes that I made, not the crop, not the color changes, the white balance changes, none of them are made to the actual image. Okay? It's only going to happen when I do this. I'm going to go here. I'm going to select all three of these. I'm going to go back over to the library, and I'm going to select Export. And now I get this menu, okay, and I have the ability to tell it what all I want to do to it when I export these. Now I have some preset export settings, and the most common one that I use is Full Res Archive. It's going to put these images back in the original folder, because that's what I do. All of my images and their derivatives, no matter whether that's a Photoshop file or something that I export as a JPEG from Lightroom, no matter what it is, all of the derivatives of the original images are going to live in the original folder so that I can always find them. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to tell it that I want to call these Lightroom Demo. And so every one of the images that I export is going to be called Lightroom Demo, starting with number 1. And then you've got other things down here where you can resize the image. Let's say that you want to have them only be, for whatever reason, a small size to put in a video or email to somebody or whatever. I pretty much export at full res all the time. I can add a signature to them if I want to. You can have a watermark, and I have a little signature thing that I put in the lower left-hand corner. So then when I hit export, it's going to immediately create versions of those. Oh, my friend is picking up food at Thai City. Sweet, almost time to eat. Anyway, I've got it set where it automatically shows me the images in the directory after export. And you can see, here they are. Lightroom Demo 1, Lightroom Demo 2, and Lightroom Demo 3. And you can see that when I look at it in preview, that it's added the settings that I wanted to the image and put my little watermark down here in the bottom. So hopefully you can see just how powerful the editing tools are, and how quickly and easily you can bring a set of images up to snuff and make any kind of changes you need to them, and do it as an entire group. I mean, you could, in theory, you could select 1,000 images and apply the same settings to every single one of them in one click. So it can be pretty fast. Okay, so one last thing that I want to cover that I mentioned earlier and then almost forgot about until I was reviewing what I just talked about, is how you use EXIF data. If you look right over here, now that I'm back in the library module, and you look over here at the right-hand side where all of the metadata is, you can see that I'm listing EXIF and IPTC stuff. The IPTC stuff is like all your copyright information. But what I want to talk about is the EXIF data. So you can see right here, I've got file name, folder, all that stuff. And then if you look right here, you can see all of the information about the photograph itself. It was taken with my Canon EOS Mark III on such and such date. These are all of the particulars of the lens I was using, what zoom I was at, and then of course the most important thing is right here with the exposure values. Now you can also change it so that Lightroom will display this information up here in the upper left hand corner, so it's real easy to see, but I'm not going to spend time showing you that right now. The important point here is that for all of you guys out there who are trying to learn photography and gain some understanding of how your photographs or how your camera works and why your photographs come out the way that they do, this is one of the most powerful things you can have at your disposal, because Lightroom makes it so easy for you to look at each photograph and say, oh, okay, well, I shot that one 1/80th of a second at f16. It's a little bit blurry because my hand was shaking. Maybe next time I need to shoot it 1/100th of a second. Or, you know, if you're just really religious about having full-length depth of field, you might look at this and go, oh, okay, well, obviously an aperture of f16 is not enough. I need to go f22 next time. So there really is no better way to start to gain an understanding of exposure and things like you know, how zoom affects a photograph, basically any of those type things that are readily visible in an image, than to be able to correlate the settings in your camera with what you see in the picture. And Lightroom makes it really easy to do that. So just one more reason to get into it. Okay, I hope you found that useful. If you weren't familiar with Lightroom before, I hope that it gives you something to think about as far as what you might want to do to get some photo editing capability. If you've already got it, I hope this helps you use it better. I've been using Lightroom for 10 years, and it's always been fantastic. One thing that has changed in those 10 years is that Adobe has gone to a subscription model. So whereas you used to be able to buy the thing standalone for about $150, which really was not a bad value, and that was assuming that you couldn't get some kind of a student discount on it or something. I'm not sure if you can actually even still do that, but what you can do now is get the Adobe Photoshop CC subscription, which gives you Photoshop and Lightroom for $10 a month. And it's a great value. I mean, I just, you know, for the amount of power that you get to process photographs, $10 a month is pretty cheap. Especially when you consider how easy something like Lightroom makes it for you to process a whole bunch of images at the same time. So anyway, I think this is relevant for scale modelers, and I hope you agree. So anyway, if you got any questions, don't hesitate to hit me up. All right, guys, as always, I appreciate you watching. Take care. Much love.